This is Strictly Business, presented by the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. Sponsored in part by the law offices of Young Wooldridge, San Joaquin Community Hospital.
And welcome back to Strictly Business. I'm Nathan Ollie, Manager of Government Affairs for the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. It's the law everybody's talking about. It's the Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act of 2014, also known as the California Mandatory Paid Sick Leave. It goes into effect July 1st and affects all business owners regardless of their size. Here to explain what employers can expect under this new law is Jay Rosenlieb, partner for Klein DeNatale Goldner et al. Thank you for joining us, Jay.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nathan. Appreciate it.
It's always interesting how they come up with these names, the Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act. There is nothing in there that would indicate to me mandatory paid sick leave.
It doesn't say Healthy Businesses Act.
It doesn't. So what is the mandatory paid sick leave? What are we looking at?
So mandatory paid sick leave, MPSL as we sometimes call it, mandates employers, as you indicated, regardless of size. So if you have one employee, you're covered. And mandates that employers provide 3 days or 24 hours per year of sick leave for each and every employee that they have.
Wow.
So that's the broad statement of it.
Okay.
And then there are some exceptions and some nuances and things like that we can get into. For example, as I indicated, it covers one employee or more. There are some exceptions. The exceptions are if you have a organized labor force, if you have a union agreement, for example, and you have a mandatory arbitration clause within that union agreement, and your union agreement provides for sick leave of some kind, then you're not covered by Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families
Because
Act.
you have a collective bargaining agreement.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And in the construction industry, if you have a collective bargaining agreement, it's a little bit different. But again, you're not covered by or you're accepted out of. There are a couple other exceptions. Home supportive living providers, in-home supported living providers are not covered. And then if you happen to own an airline, your cabin crews are not covered.
Okay, because many of us own airlines.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Interesting that they would take the time to single that out. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, because of the mandatory nature here, employers have to be on the ball with this.
Right.
Both from a compliance standpoint and I would think from an education standpoint, because employers would have an responsibility to educate their employees on the law.
Yep, there sure is. And you mentioned July 1 of this year is the date on which employers are required to begin accruing the sick leave for the employees. There's also another date. And many employers are already compliant with this date, and thankfully so, because it was January 1.
Right.
And as of January 1, you need to start, it's the education piece that you talked about. You need to put the poster up on the wall in your workplace. And most employers who get their employment law posters from the chamber or from whoever it might be, in fact, are already compliant with that particular piece of it.
And if you haven't, please get them. We still have them available.
That's right. That's right. And then the other thing that employers have to do by January 1, and if they haven't done it, then they need to do so, and that is it's the Labor Code 2810.5 notice, which is any time that you bring on a new employee, you have to inform that employee of what their wages are, the exact name of the business, and so on. And there's a particular form that the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement has put out. But added to that form as part of mandatory paid sick leave, AB 1522, is information in that notice of their rights to mandatory paid sick leave.
Okay.
Not only does that have to be given to new employees, but it also has to be given to every current employee that you have.
Interesting.
Yeah. So because it contains the information about mandatory paid sick leave. And so that has to be given not only to hourly workers, but also exempt workers.
Okay. The Chamber's Board of Directors just did this. We made some changes to our policy handbook in order to be compliant. But if your company has a sick leave policy, what do you need to, when you review the policy to make sure you're compliant, what do you need to look for?
Sure. That's a really good question. And what you need to look for is that sick pay policy is consistent with the eligibility requirements under mandatory paid sick leave, and that it is consistent with the accrual requirements of mandatory paid sick leave, and that it's consistent with the usage requirements of mandatory paid sick leave. Okay, so let's look at it in those three pieces. The eligibility requirements of MPSL, mandatory paid sick leave, are that an employee is eligible for MPSL if they've worked for you for 30 days.
Okay.
Okay. Doesn't matter how many hours per day. It doesn't matter if they're temporary. It doesn't matter if they're seasonal. As long as they've worked for you for 30 days, then they become eligible to begin accruing mandatory paid sick leave. And the accrual, interestingly enough, goes back to the first day that they started work for you. So, yeah. So
Okay.
once an employee works for you for 30 days, they then become eligible to accrue back to the first day going forward. Then the second item where for employers who have mandatory paid sick leave policies, you want to check to make sure that the accrual rate is consistent with what MPSL requires.
Which I believe you said was 24 hours?
It's 24 hours a year, 3 days or 24 hours. But the accrual rate is 1 hour for every 30 hours worked.
Okay.
So, for example, if you've got a regular 40-hour-a-week employee, then that employee is going to accrue 1.33 hours per week.
Every week.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If you have a part-time employee, okay, who works maybe 10 hours a week, then that employee would be required, would accrue 1 hour
Every 3 weeks.
every 3 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the accrual rate. And for that reason, again, MPSL covers not only regular full-time employees, but part-time, and as I indicated, seasonal, temporary,
right.
whatever it might be.
So if you have, and my next question was about temporary employees.
Yeah.
If you have a temp that you would maybe hire through a staffing agency,
Right.
who's responsible for that? How does that work?
Well, now you're talking about putting together a couple different laws, and that's
Okay.
okay. That's okay. Typically, it's the temporary agency, the staffing agencies, some of the great businesses that we have here in town that provide temporary labor and staffing. They would be responsible for that accrual. And this is for a different segment on a different day,
Okay.
but there is a new law in California which places more responsibility on the clients of temporary agencies and staffing agencies for wage and hour compliance.
Okay. So you can't just turn it over and let the staffing agency deal with it. You're going to be on the hook as
Yeah,
well.
there's
Okay.
a little bit that you have to do. Yeah.
So what if, and I know some companies do this, they just offer PTO, just pay
Right.
time off. It's a pot, it's
Yeah.
2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever.
Yeah.
How does this affect those companies?
Sure. Many employers have PTO policies. They don't have vacation. They don't have sick. They have PTO. Okay. And the compliance strategies are fairly broad right now.
Okay.
Those companies that have PTO policies can continue to have PTO policies as long as the eligibility, accrual, and usage as provided for in those PTO policies are compliant with mandatory paid sick leave.
Oh,
You
okay.
can continue to call it PTO as long as it complies with
Those particulars.
MPSL.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any penalties for non-compliance? Have those been discussed?
Yeah, the penalties are provided for in the statute.
Okay.
And the penalties generally there is no private right of action, meaning that it can be enforced against the employer. There are fines and penalties that are owed and doing to the governmental agencies, and the employee can seek to enforce it, and what they will receive is the MPSL accrual that they should have otherwise accrued. There is also a no retaliation provision. So if you as an employee take MPSL or you complain that you did not receive your MPSL, and then your employer unfortunately retaliates against you for asserting your rights,
Okay.
then you're entitled to damages for retaliation.
Okay.
And so that could be a little bit of a dicey deal.
So, what are you hearing from your clients, from folks in the community about the economic impacts? Certainly, our chamber, the California Chamber, spoke out against MPSL,
Yeah.
not from a philosophical standpoint of wanting employees to have the right to take the day off when they're sick,
Right.
but from the economic impact. What are you hearing about things like that?
That's a really good question. And what we have been hearing initially is, everything ranging from I'm going to have to shut down my business to this is going to cost me a lot of money to it's a plot to run me out of town. When you grind down on it, for those employers who are not offering vacation or sick or PTO, this could have an impact because what it means is they're going to have to pay their employees for up to 3 days or 24 hours per year for time off when the employer's losing that
Sure.
productivity. They're losing whatever they might, and they still have to pay. So for those employers, it's going to impact them the most. For employers who already pay sick or vacation or PTO, it should not have that big of an impact depending on the strategy that you adopt. For example, if you already offer sick pay, then what you're doing is maybe increasing the accrual rate, maybe increasing the range of circumstances under which the sick leave can be used, and maybe increasing the scope of the employees who are eligible for the sick pay. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward.
Policy changes, things
Policy
like that.
changes,
Okay.
yeah, things like that, yeah. And I think it's important to note, I referenced usage a couple times. Generally speaking, sick pay is used for the employee's illness.
Right.
And you ask the employee to bring in a note from the doctor or something of that nature. A couple of things to keep in mind here on MPSL. One is that you can no longer require the employee to bring in a note
At all?
at all
Oh,
for the first 3 days.
Oh, for the first 3 days.
For the first
Okay.
3 days. And also, you can't limit it just to the employee. The employee can use the MPSL for the illness of a sick parent, child, spouse, grandparent, grandchild,
Oh, okay.
and for that employee's, if they've been a victim of sexual assault or domestic abuse. They can
My
use it
wife
for
is
that.
home today with our little girl, so she
Okay.
doesn't need a note to go back to work tomorrow.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? We've got just a minute left. Is there anything else that other ideas, topics that the employers can use to make sure they're in compliance, where they can go to get more information, maybe?
Sure. An excellent resource is the Chamber of Commerce, whether it be the Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce or the California Chamber of Commerce. Excellent resources. the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement and the Department of Fair Employment and Housing have great websites, and there's no substitute for a great lawyer who's practiced in the area of employment law.
But you've got about 3 months left, so better get to working on those compliance issues.
That's
sure.
right. Yeah.
So, and if you haven't gotten your labor poster posted by January 1st, give us a call. We can still help you out before you get fined with that. Jay Rosenlieb, Klein DeNatale Goldner, thanks very much for joining.
Thank you.
That'll do it for Strictly Business this week. I want to thank our guests, Jacob Henry of Stack Technologies, Will Carter of the CSUB Roadrunner Athletic Program, Hillary Haynes of the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce, and of course, Jay Rosenlieb of Klein DeNatale Goldner et al. I also want to thank our sponsors for this program, San Joaquin Community Hospital and the law offices of Young Wooldridge. We'll be back next week with more Strictly Business. For Melissa Rossiter, Hillary Haynes, and all of us at the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce, my name is Nathan Ollie. I'm the Manager of Government Affairs. Have a great week, and we'll see you back next Monday at 10 a.m. with more Strictly Business.